Here we go. We are on page 127. Remember, The Go-Giver Influencer, a little story about a most persuasive idea by Bob Berg and John David Mann. Okay. And away we go. When Jillian rode up at the juice caboose on Friday morning, the coach took one look at her across the room and gestured for her to stay there. Spoke a few words to the person at the order counter, then walked over to join her at the front door. "You're worried," he said. She nodded. He could see that from across the room. "About your meeting today." She nodded again. She hadn't shared the details of her negotiations with the coach, but enough knew that he knew this was make or break for her. "I can only stay a minute," she said. "I really need to get back and prepare a few things." "Come on," he said. "Let's walk." He took her arm and they went outside. He asked where she was parked, and when she told him which lot, he started walking with her in that direction. "I'll take you as far as your car," he said. "The rest is up to you." It was unseasonably cool out and overcast. She turned up the car. One second. People, that's rude when you can see me online and because you ruin it for everybody else. 1 second, I gotta turn this one on over here. There we go. Just a minute, everybody. That's why I ask people not to try to get a hold of me. Because if I have to, I'll just have to turn it off when I'm doing these. Give me a second. Almost done. Connecting. Okay. Live. Okay, we're good. Sorry about that. Alright, here we go. Alright, if you guys see me on here and I'm live, do me a favor, don't call. Otherwise, I gotta turn on my my non-call answers, and I sometimes forget to turn them back on, so if somebody tries to call me later. So it also shows me when scammers are not paying attention to my page and they're just trying to call to try to scam me. So if you're calling me, I usually think you're a scammer. So let's get back into what I was doing, page 128. Okay, the collar of her jacket. The coach seemed undisturbed in his sweats and t-shirt. "You know how people say it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game that counts?" That's close, but it's not just the how. It's also about the why. If you know why you're playing the game, then even if you lose, you win. And if you forget why you're playing, then even if you win, you lose. Even if you win, you lose? Jillian tried to wrap her brain around that as they walked on. "If you don't know why," the coach continued, "then I don't know how skilled you are. Genuine winning is impossible, out of your reach. The why of sports is simple, to express excellence in motion. And in business," said Jillian. "That's the why of business." He turned to her. "What would you say?" Jillian thought for a moment. "I would think it's different for everyone." The coach chuckled and shook his head. "No, it's exactly the same for everyone. It feels different, looks different, and expresses itself differently, but it's the same thing, and it's simple too. You go into business to nudge the world forward." Jillian looked at him. "That's it?" "That's it. To make the world a better place, improve people's lives, leave the planet a smarter, kinder, richer, more whole place than it was when you got there. To create value, which you do by sharing what you know and what you have. What you've been given, all business, whether each business person remembers it or not, is an expression of gratitude." Elizabeth put it perfectly. Gratitude is the secret to all magnificent success. They walked on. "You remember what I said about the difference between sports and business?" Jillian remembered. "Winning in sports is about competition. Winning in business is about collaboration." He glanced over at her impressed. "Good memory." "Well, that's not quite the whole truth. Winning is anything is really about collaboration. So here's another baseball question. Sabadoo O?" Jillian shook her head. "Never heard of him." "Japanese baseball star. Played in the Japanese Pro Baseball League in the 70s. He's the world lifetime record for home runs. That's the world record. You know what he said about the pitchers who went up against him on the opposing team. They are my partners in hitting home runs. When you know what Sadhu O knew, you'll know what genuine winning means, and then it'll come to you naturally." As they reached her car, they both stopped walking. "Good luck today," he said. "You'll do fine." He turned and started to walk away. "Wait," said Jillian. "What's the thumb?" You told me you could count everything you knew about winning in business on the fingers of one hand." She held up her right hand. "Index finger, pointing straight up. 1, you said, breathe. She counted off on her other finger. 2, listen. 3, smile. 4, be gracious. That's 4. You can't hold a bat with 4 fingers, or throw a football, or shake a hand on a deal. So what's the thumb? He cocked his head, then slowly nodded. Smart kid. He backed away a few steps, still nodding, then turned and called her over his shoulder as he walked back the way they'd come. You'll figure it out. She stared at his receding figure, suddenly feeling panic. Wait, she called out. He stopped and turned back to her, look at her. How? How will I figure it out? He reached one hand out in her direction, all 5 fingers outstretched. It reminded her of that odd gesture he'd made the first time they'd met at his office when he placed his outstretched hand on the desk between them. Trust, he called back. He turned and walked away. When Jackson Hill arrived at Rachel's coffee house on Friday morning and headed for the corner table, he stopped short. There was no one there. A moment later, a server stopped at the table, bearing a large tray. It was Holly, the first person he met there on Monday morning. The judge sends her regrets, said Holly, she said. An emergency came up and she wouldn't be able to make it. Jackson's heart sank as he sank into his seat. Without the 5th clause, the rest is de facto null and void. He'd hoped that last bit of Henshaw wisdom might somehow rescue him. And she told me to serve you this the moment you came in. Holly set the tray down, lifted off a plate of hot peach pancakes, dripped with real maple syrup and topped with French vanilla whipped cream, and set it in front of Jackson. Jackson looked at the plate for a moment, then at Holly, then at the plate again, and started to laugh. She chuckled, to not knowing what they were laughing about, but happy to join in. Thank you, said Jackson. Holly smiled. My pleasure, she said. At his place, Holly had also set a 1-stem vase holding a single white rose, and propped up against it a small envelope with a single word penned in neat calligraphy. Jackson. He took the envelope and opened it. A small card slipped out. Sometimes you need to just trust and eat the pancakes. He puzzled over the note for a full minute. Finally, he slipped the card back into the envelope and pocketed it. He began to eat, wondering why on earth he was sitting here eating a plate of pancakes, which he had to admit were delicious. As he took the last bite, probably the first full meal he had eaten all week, he thought, a curious sense of calm settled over him. He didn't know why or how, but he was ready for his meeting. Chapter 13. Chapter 13, the 5th clause. Jackson Hill looked, well, he looked different. Different how? Maribel could not put her finger on it. He seemed more solid, more there, like a man at peace with his own convictions. You can go right in, Mr. Hill, she said. Miss Waters is expecting you. Thanks, Maribel, he said. As he walked past her desk, Maribel leaned forward and stage whispered, I hope it goes well. Jackson stopped and looked at her. Thank you, Maribel, he said again. I hope so, too. Jillian felt flustered. She was trying to stay focused on her plan for this meeting, which she'd spent the last hour preparing for, but her thoughts kept drifting to an image of Marvin and Miss B serving little kings and queens, and to Sarado, whose face she had looked up online the moment she'd gotten back to her office, as if staring at the man's features on a computer screen would shed a light on what the coach had told her. When you know what Sadhu O knew, then you'll know what genuine winning means. She pushed the thoughts away. Oh, she could breathe all right. She could listen and smile and be gracious. But she could also be smart and do her homework. And she had done exactly that, which was why she knew she had this in the bag. So why was she still feeling flustered? Jackson took his seat and looked again at the photo on Miss Waters' desk. She's beautiful, he said. Oh, said Miss Waters, thank you. Jackson looked at her, then at the photo again. then back at her. Then his face a total deadpan, he said. And the human child's lovely too. They looked at each other for a prolonged instant and then both burst out laughing. I can't believe you said that, Miss Waters gasped, whipping tears of laughter from her eyes. Me either, said Jackson, smiling. They looked at each other. Well, she said, shall we get on with it? He nodded. Sure, let's go. Jillian felt her heart beating in her chest. He seemed so calm, and it threw her. Stay in control, Jill, she told herself. Eyes on the prize. A signed contract in her hands. Not next month, not next week, today. I've put quite a bit of time into this. The past few days, she began. Jillian had a secret weapon. Two, actually. Some enterprising staffer for the coroner's office had dug up a most interesting little factoid. It seems our boy Jackson is in a rather precautious situation with his bank, the guy had said. They're about to pull the plug. And by about, I mean by close of business today. Disconnect the life support, scuttle the ship, hammer the for sale sign into the front lawn. She could practically see him drool when he said it. That was one, and two. Incredibly, she had somehow finagled the corner office into giving her the okay on the underwriting Jackson's kitchens, with stringent, brutal conditions on how much he could spend on a significantly bare-bones plan. But still, a thumbs up was a thumbs up. She'd had to be persistent, and in the process, had probably devalued her currency in the SVP's eyes. She hoped it was worth it. The bottom line, she said, is that I believe we'll be able to provide you with the underwriting you suggested for your production facilities, with some terms attached that you may not completely love, but still it'll get the job done. Jackson Hill looked both surprised and impressed, but all he said was, wow. And the whole issue of exclusivity, she went on, well, that may be a sticking point, but I have some ideas on how we may be able to work around and find some middle ground. Jillian could hardly believe it herself, but it was true. This was going to work. He needed what she had, and she had what she had. This was a done deal. Whatever resistance Mr. Hill might still put up to their terms, she knew it didn't matter because she had the winning hand here, right? And besides, this was the right thing to do, not just for her, but for both of them, right? But he was not acting like a man about to put up a fight, not even slightly. It was clear to Jackson that she felt triumphant, yet at the same time unsure. He didn't know how he knew that, he just did. He felt his heart go out to her. She was having a crisis here, and that was clear. Not that he wasn't having one too. That's great, Miss Waters, he said. He paused, not quite sure what to say next. Jillian, she said. Sorry? Please call me Jillian. Jackson nodded slowly. Okay. The thing is, Jillian, it seems I have two options here. Go with your terms the way your company has worked them out, or doggedly stick to my guns and risk losing out altogether on this amazing opportunity. For the past week, I've spent just about every waking minute trying to figure out how I can make this work. All week, I've been telling myself, no matter what they come up with, say yes. You've got to get this contract. He paused again briefly, but maybe that's not the right goal. He shook his head, a long, slow shake. I can't supply on a national scale. Not yet. I'm just not ready. He looked at her, and I can't justify giving anyone any kind of an exclusive. I'm just not willing. The moment the words left his lips, it occurred to Jackson to wonder if Jillian Waters would think he was being tactical here, because what he just said sure sounded an awful like a version of the takeaway, but it wasn't. For a split second, the thought crossed Jillian's mind. He's posturing. He's got to be posturing. But in the next moment, she banished the thought. He meant what he said. She could see that. She could sense it. This wasn't a strategic ploy, a tactical feint, a negotiation technique. He wasn't trying to win. He was letting go. What do you have that you love? Well, he had Solomon, Walt, Keith, and Lily, and all his other friends. Fight for what you want, Walt had said. You are in the right. You are in the right here. But Jackson didn't feel like fighting, and being right didn't seem important anymore. Even if it meant stepping away from his contract altogether and going back to being just a guy making the world's best pet food in his own kitchen. It's just, he began then stopped. I'm sorry, he said. At this point, I think I just have to let it go. I just have to let it go, as his words echoed in her mind. Jillian saw her future evaporating. No signed contract, no viable bid for SVP, no promotion, no corner office. Wait, though. She was still holding that juicy bit of intelligence on his bank loan in her back pocket. She could pull it out and dangle it in front of him. I have two options, he'd said. And he was right. There were just two options here, and hers was the right one. She knew he was never over the barrel. She knew he was over the barrel, and she could push on that point, hammer home what her company's signature could do for his future. Show him that this was the right path to take. The only option open to him, really. He might just cave. She was sure they'd be able to work out some sort of compromise. Compromise. From the Latin meaning, nobody gets what they really want. Jackson stood, reached out, and shook her hand in calm and firm. You went to bat for me, and I really appreciate that. It's been a genuine pleasure almost doing business with you, Jillian. He made it all the way to the door by the time Jillian Waters found her voice. Mr. Hill, she called out. Jackson turned back. Jackson, please. Right, of course. I'm sorry, Jackson. She was standing now, too. She came out from behind her desk and walked over to him, to his face. Jackson, she said, I'm just wondering. Jillian stopped, her mind going a million miles a second. Was she crazy? Once she went down this road, there'd be no turning back. I'm just wondering, she repeated. Could you wait out in the reception with Mirabelle just a minute or two, just long enough for me to make a phone call? He looked at her quizzically. I'm just thinking, she said. Maybe there's a third option. The rest of the day was a whirlwind. The coach's philanthropist friend Elizabeth was as good as her word, even on this ridiculous short notice, at the prospect of doing something special to help animals. The sweet, sweet creatures, as she'd put it. She was happy to meet Jillian and the young man who accompanied her. When presented with Elizabeth Bushnell's signature on a piece of paper, Jackson Bank all at once became exceptionally polite. Extending the loan? Why, of course. That should not be a problem. What's that? Perhaps more generous terms. They were sure that could be looked into. Outside the bank, while Jackson hailed for a cab for Elizabeth, Jillian turned to Elizabeth and said, You know, this is so perfect. Jackson never really wanted to be in charge of the business side of things, which is the part I love the most. What he wants is to formulate the products and be in touch with the clients. Elizabeth smiled at her and said, It is a lovely solution. The best ones always are. Jillian didn't know how to put this in words. I can't tell you how very grateful I am, Miss Bushnell. Elizabeth patted her hand and said, You just did, dear. She pushed her glasses up on her nose, peered through them at Jillian, and gave an almost smile. So slight you'd miss it if you blink. And why don't you call me Aunt Ellie? All my friends do. At 5 minutes to 5 that Friday afternoon, Jillian handed in her resignation at Smith & Banks. She handed it, in fact, directly to the Senior Vice President of Distribution, who was so startled that one of his subordinates was leaving ahead of his own ceremonious departure that he failed to say anything but an unceremonious, Huh? Best of luck, sir, said Jillian. I'm grateful for everything I learned here. She had, she explained, received an office she couldn't turn down, going into business with Jackson Hill and Elizabeth Bushnell. As of today, she was managing partner of Angels Clothed in Fur, LLC. For Jillian, though, as remarkable as the entire afternoon was, as much as a kaleidoscope of impossible events and memorable moments as it was, there was one particular point in the day that was still thumbing through her like an electric current when she went to bed that night, a moment she expected would stay with her for the rest of her life. As they stood there outside the bank waiting for Jackson to flag down their cab, Elizabeth Bushnell had turned to her and said, "You know, you remind me of myself, a number of years ago, of course." "Is this me?" thought Jillian, 30 years from now? Well, now, she couldn't picture a more wonderful future than that. That night, Jackson practically fell into bed. It was been a long day, huge, big in every way possible, the best day of his life, but long, too, and he was exhausted. Solomon jumped up on Jackson's bed, walked around Jackson's feet, and over to his left side, where he collapsed into a large heap with a deep "What's up, buddy? You think you're sleeping up here tonight?" Solomon said nothing, just hitched the body up closer until he was smashed against Jackson's left side. Jackson chuckled. "I have a feeling one of us is getting a wink of sleep tonight." Solomon put his chin down on his paws and looked at Jackson. Jackson turned off the light and laid there. Tired as he was, he couldn't sleep. He thought about everything that had happened that day. About sitting alone at Rochelle's famous coffee this morning, eating his peach pancakes. It's always helpful to see the other side. He sat up and switched on the lights again, reached over to the light jacket he'd been wearing, and pulled out the envelope the judge had left for him. He slipped the card out of the envelope once more, turned it over. Sure enough, there was writing on the other side, too. It said, "Dear Jackson, I never told you the fifth clause. Here it is. Let go of having to be right. But I suspect you already knew that. Celia Henshaw." "Sometimes you have to let go of having to be right," he said aloud, "and just eat the pancakes." He laughed quietly for a moment, then set the note down on the nightstand, switched off the light again, and rolled over. Within 30 seconds, he was asleep. "Woof," said Solomon. Chapter 14, The Toast. Everybody give me a thumbs up. We're almost done. The tall woman with the auburn hair looked across the table and smiled. She loved it. Her at Ifrate's. Best food in town, as far as she was concerned. "Me too," said the man in the seat across from her, reading her mind as usual. "Although I am partial to the meals my wife and I make at home," he added. Natural Augusta. The waiter had appeared at their table, soundlessly holding out twin bottles ready to pour. "Sparkling for me, please," the woman replied. "Grazy Marco and still for the coach." "See," said the young man who was already pouring Prego. He nodded once and slightly disappeared. She turned to her companion. "A toast, Coach Henshaw." "What are we celebrating, Judge Henshaw?" "The young man who was coming in for advice this week. I think he found a satisfactory solution to the quandary that he's on. You might say a winning track.